We are in the bottom of DAF Chaf Beis Amud Aleph. We're again going a little bit forward so that we'll catch up for Tisha B'Av. Sorry, Chaf Aleph. Sorry about that. Yeah. Bottom of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Kara'a Echad Kira'u Shnaim Yatzu V'chulei. The Mishnah had said that if two people read the Megillah simultaneously, you can still be yotzei the reading of the Megillah. So the Brisa says Tana Masha Einkein B'Torah, but that's not true with Kriyas HaTorah. With Kriyas HaTorah, only one person can read it, because if more than one person would read it, it would not be as audible to the listener. We say normally Trei Kali Lo Mishtamoi. Two voices cannot be carefully discerned because they cancel each other out, so you won't be able to hear the words properly. So the question is, why then by Megillah is it okay? So the Brisa will tell us, because it's a chaviva, it's something that is precious to the listener, as we'll explain shortly. So Tanu Rabbanan, the Brisa now elaborates, but Torah echad kori ve'echad mitargem, uvilvad shelo yehe echad kori shnai mitargemin. When you have someone read the Torah publicly, you can only have one person read the psukim, and the other person, as we know, was the practice in generations past, that you'd have one person translating it into Aramaic, and he also has to be audible, because the Torah contains halachic practice, it contains the mitzvahs. So anyone who doesn't understand Hebrew has to be able to at least hear the Aramaic translation, so that he'll know what the Torah tells him he's supposed to do. And that's why you can't have more than one person reading Torah, and you can't have more than one person reading the translation either. That's why it says that you can't have even one person reading and two people reading the translation. Uvinavi echad kore yushnai metargemin. By contrast, in the Navi, it was also the practice to read the Navi publicly and also to have a metargem, to have a translator. But there, it's no big deal if you have two people reading the translation at the same time. You want to retain the sanctity of the words of the Navi so that they're perfectly audible. That's fine. But it's okay if you want to have the translator say it in unison with another translator, because the worst that'll happen is that a person will miss a few words because he can't discern the words clearly. But because there's no mitzvah, there's no halacha that's contained in the Navi, if a guy misses a few words, nishkaferlach, it's not such a terrible thing. But even by Navi, you can't have two people reading the words of the Navi, because of their kedusha. You want to make sure that people hear it clearly. But by contrast, Megillah afilu asara korin. But when it comes to Hallel and Megillah, you could even have 10 people reciting Hallel publicly at the same time, and 10 people reading the Megillah at the same time, and the listener could still be yotzei. My taima keven de chaviva yahavi daitayu v'shami, because it is precious. It's something that's precious to the listener. Why? Presumably because it's only periodic. Megillah is once a year. Hallel is only on Yantiv, and therefore people are paying special attention. It's a holy day. It's something that they all came with great anticipation to listen to. So even if 10 people say it at the same time, people will exert themselves to make sure that they hear every word. Next, Makam shenagu levarech yavarech. The Mishnah had said that if there's a minhag to make a bracha on the Megillah, you should. But if there's not a minhag to make, there's a minhag not to make a bracha on the Megillah, then you're exempt. Amar Abaye lo shanu elo lachareha, aval lefaneha mitzvah levarech. That's only true as far as making a bracha after the Megillah reading. But everyone would agree that you're obligated to make a bracha before the Megillah reading, and that's not dependent upon minhag. The Amar of Yehuda Amar Shmuel kol mitzvahs kulin mevarach alein over la'asiyasan. That all mitzvahs, you have to make a bracha before you do the mitzvah. And since reading of the Megillah is a mitzvah, you have to make a bracha before you do it. And the term that the Gemara uses for before is over. That's what the word means. Over la'asiyasan, preceding the performance. My mashma dahai over lishna da akdumehu. Where do we see that the word over is using as a word of precedence? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Kra. So here you have one pasuk from Shmuel, Vayoratz Achima'atz derech hakikar vaya'avoris hakushi. That Achima'atz runs through the plain, and he goes in front of the Cushite. So therefore you see that it means going in front of or before. Abaya Omer Mehacha. Abaya says it's from this pasuk when Yaakov was going out to greet Esav. It says V'hu avar lifneim, that he passed in front of them or before them. V'ibayis ema mehacha. I have a third pasuk Vayavor malkam lifneihem va'Hashem birosham. So this pasuk is from Micha, that it says that their king shall pass in front of them and God is leading them. So you see that when the king is in front of his troops or his people, so you see that the word is avar, to go in front of or to go before. So now the question is that we've established that you always have to make a bracha before you read the Megillah. Lefaneha may mevarich. So what bracha are you supposed to make? Rav Sheshish mikat Rizaya ikla lekamei Rav Ashi. He once stood before Rav Ashi and uborich manach. He made the bracha of Mem Nun Ches, which Rashi says is an acronym which stands for three brachos. Mem stands for Al Mikra Megillah. Blessed are you Hashem who commanded us to read the Megillah. Nun stands for Sha'asa Nisim La'avosenu, that God did miracles for our ancestors by Amim Ahim Bazman Hazeh back then during this time of year. And Ches stands for Shehechianu. So that's what we do. We make three brachas before we read the Megillah. La'achareha my mevarich. Okay, what bracha do you make afterwards, where the Megillah says it was dependent upon the custom? You say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam. Some have the word hakel, different girsos, and actually different minhagim as well today. Haraves rivenu v'hadones dinenu, that God fights our fight and He judges our judgment. V'hanokemes nikmasenu v'haminifralonu mitzarenu, that God avenges our vengeance. He exacts punishment from those who oppress us. V'hamashalem gemul l'chol yavei nafshenu, and He pays a recompense to all of the enemies of our soul. Baruch atah Hashem hanifra li Yisrael mikol tzareihem. Blessed are you, Hashem, who exacts vengeance on behalf of the Jewish people from all of their enemies. Rava Amar Hakel HaMoshiach. Rava says that the proper ending is that you call God the saving God, the God who saves. So the difference between the two, it would seem at face value, is that the first version, it focuses more on God taking vengeance against our enemies, and the second version of the bracha focuses on God saving the Jewish people. Different nuances of the same idea, but focusing on different aspects of the way Hashem protects the Jewish people. So Amar Rav Papa Hilkach Nimrinu Lituravayu. Therefore, a person, since we have this machlokus, a difference of opinion of which the proper focus is, you should say both. You should say Baruch Atah Hashem Hanifra Yisrael Mikol Tzareihem Hakel HaMoshiach. That blessed are you, Hashem, who exacts punishment for the sake of Israel from all of their enemies, and is the God who saves, or the God who saves.
It was both in the Megillah.
What?
It was both in the Megillah.
Yeah. B'sheni, now that we finished our discussion about Hilchas Kriyas HaMegillah, now we go to the second part of the Mishnah, which had to do with the laws of Kriyas HaTorah in general. And we said in the Mishnah that the rabbis instituted, actually it was instituted by Ezra, that you read the Torah every Monday, Thursday, and Shabbos afternoon. You have to have three aliyahs in all three places. B'sheni u'v'chamishi, b'Shabbos b'mincha, korin shlosha v'chulei. So hani shlosha keneged mi. We see that this is the minimum amount of aliyahs you're supposed to have. What does the number 3 correspond to? Amar Ravasi keneged Torah nevimu kesuvim. Rav Amar keneged kohalim nevimu v'Yisraelim. You'll recall that we have almost an identical discussion Maseches Tainus over the next page or so. Ravasi says it corresponds to the quality of Torah. The reason why we have 3 aliyahs is because we want to fashion ourselves after the structure of God's Torah, which is divided into 3 parts, Torah, Nevi'im, and Kesuvim. So therefore we have 3 aliyahs to remind us of that tripartite structure. However, Rava says no, it's not to correspond to the structure of Tanakh, but rather to correspond to the structure of Klal Yisrael, who are divided into 3 strata of class, Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael. And since the Jewish people and the Torah are connected, and the Jewish people are the ones who are given the Torah, we want to represent all classes or all strata of Jewish society in Kriyas HaTorah. Elahadetani Rav Shimi ein pochasin miyud psukim beveis hakneses bayedaber olam min haminyan hani asara keneged mi. What about the teaching of Rav Shimi that says that under normal circumstances you can't have less than 10 psukim when you have Kriyas HaTorah? And even though you can't have less than 10, by Daber Hashem al Moshe Lemor, even though it's a small pasuk that doesn't convey any new information, it still counts as one of the 10. Where do we get the number 10 from? What does 10 correspond to? Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Keneged Asara Batlanim Shebebeis HaKnesses, and Rav Yosef Amar Keneged Asara Sadibros Shnemer Lamoshe B'Sinai. So again, you have a very similar machlokus over here. Does it correspond to Jewish society, or does it correspond to the Torah itself? So the first opinion, it corresponds to Jewish society. What was the definition of a large, significant city? A city who has 10 batlanim, 10 men of leisure, who are available always to make a minyan in the Beis HaKnesses. The other opinion is that it corresponds to the 10 Commandments, the Torah itself. I believe it's the parallel machlokas as to whether the ordination of the protocols of Kriyas HaTorah have more to do with the structure of Jewish society or have more to do with the structure of the Torah itself. It's the similar idea. We skip the parentheses, so basically what you see from here is, and Rabbi Yochanan Amar Keneged Asara Ma'amar Sheba Nivra Ha'olam. Rabbi Yochanan has a third opinion. He says the 10 psukim that we're supposed to read every time we read the Torah corresponds to the 10 utterances of Hashem that he employed when he created the world. Hey Ninhu. So what are the 10 utterances? The Gemara says, Vayomer de Bereshis. The Gemara says, if you count the number of times it says Vayomer Elokim in the first chapter of Genesis, at the time of creation, you'll note that it's 10 times it says Vayomer Elokim. The Gemara says, not so fast. Hani Tisha Havu. I only count 9. So your homework assignment is, when you're in shul tonight, about to fall asleep, right, during the Rabbi's Dvar Torah, or at some other juncture, right, open up a Chumash and look at the first chapter of Bereshis and count how many Vayomer Elokims it has. But the Gemara says, wait a minute, I only count 9. So now the Gemara says, Bereshis nami maimerhu. But there's an implicit Vayomer Elokim that's not written explicitly, because the first pasuk that says, Bereshis bara Elokim Esa Shamayim v'Esa Aretz, really it's as if it said, Vayomer Elokim Yehi Shamayim v'Aretz, that God said, may there be heaven and earth. And then, in the beginning, Hashem created heaven and earth. Okay, so that's Dichsiv Bidvar Hashem Shemaim Nasu V'Ruch Piv Kol Tzimam. As we know, the pasuk says that heaven also was created by the word of God. So therefore, that was also an utterance. The question, of course, is then why doesn't the Torah say Vayomer Elokim Yehi Shemaim V'Aretz? You can work on that for your homework assignment also. Amar Rava. Rishon Shekara Dalid Meshubach. Now, but before we go into the next Gemara, let me point something out. The Gemara says that you're not allowed to have less than 10 psukim when you have Kriyas HaTorah. We're going to see a Gemara in a few lines that's going to contradict that, because there are times when there are only 8 psukim for a communal Torah reading. Sometimes there are only 9 psukim. Even today, there's a 9 pasuk reading that we do every year. Does anyone know what that is? 9 pasuk Kriyas HaTorah. Amalek, right? On Purim morning, the Kriyas HaTorah of Amalek is 9 psukim. It's 3, 3, and 3. So how do we do that if the Gemara says you're not allowed to have less than 10? So Tosfos clarifies that you're not allowed to have less than 10 if you're dealing with subject material that has more than 10 psukim or more. But if the subject material is limited to less than 10 psukim, as long as you can get 3 aliyahs for 3 people, then you can still do it.
A minimum of 3 psukim each.
Minimum of 3 psukim each. We'll see a configuration where you can even get by with 8, and we'll see that shortly. But the point is that the idea of a minimum of 10 is only when you have enough material of text that you can have 10 psukim. So therefore, we say that if you don't economize, since you can keep going weiter, go weiter until you get 10. Amar Rava, Rishon Shekara Daled Meshubach, Sheni Shekara Daled Meshubach, Shlishi Shekara Daled Meshubach. So Rava now says, if the Kohen, now when you have 10 psukim, you have to break it down into 4, 3, and 3. 4 psukim, 3 psukim, and 3 psukim. In other words, one out of the 3 people is going to read 4 psukim, and 2 of the 3 people are going to read 3 psukim each. Why don't you answer that, Shlomi? So the Gemara says, so which person would be best off getting the 4? So the Gemara says, I have an argument to make that it can either be the first person is better off getting the 4, the second person, the Levi, or the Yisrael. There's an advantage to each one of them being chosen with getting the larger aliyah. So Rishon Shekara Dalad Meshubach, why is the first person, praiseworthy for getting the 4? Did none. B'shalosh kupos shel shalosh sholosoyin shebahim tormenes alishka b'yakasiv alein aleph beis gimel leida ezamehen nitrum arishon lahakrim mimenu rishon shemitzvah barishon. So we learned this in Masech Eshkalim. Remember the idea of Trumas Halishka. They would go into, after they would collect the Machatzis HaShekel from all of the Jewish people, they would put all the coins in a special chamber called the Lishka. And then they would go in at different times of the year, 3 men with 3 boxes, and they would scoop up the coins from the floor and fill up each one of the 3 boxes. But then the Mishnah says that each box had a letter or a letter written on it. The first box had Aleph, the second box had Beis, and the third box had Gimel. Why? What difference does it make? The answer is because whatever box scooped up first is the box that you're supposed to go to first to start depleting the coins for the purchase of communal karbanos. And the reason is because whatever box you start with is the box that has the greatest prominence and importance. So therefore you see that whatever you start with has a certain level of priority. And that's why the Kohen has a reason for arguing that he should get the 4 psukim. Next, Emsoi Shekara Bar Meshubach, there's also an argument to give the 4 psukim to the Levi. The Tanya El Mul Pnei HaMenorah Ya'iru Melamed Shemitzadi Pneim Klapi Ner Maravi V'Ner Maravi Klapi Shechina. Because we know when it comes to the lighting of the menorah, there's a difference of opinion in the Gemara Menachos how the menorah was positioned. But according to the opinion that it was positioned such that it went from north to south, which means that when you walked into the Heichal, you saw the menorah facing you, right? You can see all 7 branches. The Ner Maravi is the center candle. That's what, according to that opinion. And it was the wick would be facing inwards, going further westward. That's why it's called the Ner Maravi. And all of the other the wicks of the candles had to be positioned facing inward towards the middle candle. And Rabbi Yochanan says, we see from here that which is in the middle has the sense of prominence and greater importance. So you see that the middle aliyah, the Levi, has an argument to make why he should get the 4 psukim, because he's the most important, because he's the middle guy. And va'achron shekar arba meshubach mishum malin b'kodesh v'lo maridin. And what's the argument for the Yisrael to get the 4 psukim? Because he's the most important. Because we always say you ascend in holiness and you don't descend. So therefore, if we were to give the 4 psukim to the Kohen or the Levi, we would be descending in importance by giving the Yisrael only 3 when one of the previous guys got 4. So therefore, we should always save the 4 for the last guy so that we can go up in Kedusha. And in any event, so basically what the Gemara is saying is the argument could be made for each one of the 3 to take the 4 psukim for himself. Rav Papa ikla lebei kenishta da abigobar v'kara rishon arba'a v'shabchei Rav Papa. And the Gemara tells us that once Rav Papa came to the synagogue of Abigovar, and the Kohen actually read the 4 psukim, and the other 2 guys read the 3, and Rav Papa praised the Kohen for taking the 4 psukim. Ein pochsin mehen ve'ein mosifin, that you're not allowed to have less than 3 aliyahs, you're not allowed to have more than 3 aliyahs, because we said people have to go to work. And then the Mishnah had said, haposeach v'hachosim b'torah, that the first guy, the Kohen who gets the aliyah, says the opening bracha v'asher bachar banu, and doesn't say an ending bracha. The Levi doesn't say any bracha either before or after, and the Yisrael does not say a pre-bracha, but he says the post-bracha v'asher nasan lanu. And basically what the Mishnah is describing is a system whereby only the first Ola says the opening bracha, and the last Ola says the closing bracha, and no one in between says anything else. So Tana haposeach mevorach lefanei v'chosim, guy before had opened up with a bracha. What's Yotzin? A guy needs to leave in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah because he needs to make a l'chaim. I don't know. What does he have to leave? What does he have to leave?
Kiddush Club.
Right? He said it. I didn't say it. Okay. Anyway, he has to leave. He's got to go to the washroom. Okay. So for whatever reason, he's got to leave in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah. And if he doesn't hear the last guy making a bracha, he's going to think that you don't need to make a bracha at the end of the reading.
Or is it because he won't be Yotze?
No, it's not because he won't be Yotze. It's because of the misunderstanding. He says he'll think Yomar ein bracha b'Torah. He'll think that you don't need to make a bracha, and he'll make an error for the next time. Next, B'Rosh Chadashim B'Chol Shamoid Korin Arba'a V'Chulei. On Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaMoed, you have 4 aliyahs, not 3 aliyahs. Ba'minei Ula Bar Rav Meirava Parshas Rosh Chodesh Ketzad Korin Oso. So now we have the famous discussion. We saw this in Tainus. It appears in other places as well. What are you supposed to do? You have the Rosh Chodesh laning. Now, let's understand. Rosh Chodesh laning is 4 aliyahs, right? Here's our dilemma. We have 3 paragraphs of the Rosh Chodesh laning. Is everyone familiar? If you're not familiar, you might want to open up a chumash to corroborate what I'm telling you. There are 3 paragraphs of the Rosh Chodesh laning. Okay, the first paragraph has how many psukim? Has 8 psukim. The second paragraph has 2 psukim. The third paragraph has 5 psukim. Now we have to somehow create a system whereby we can have 4 aliyahs and distribute them in such a way where halachically we'll be giving each person 3 psukim, but also we have another criterion to fulfill. We have to make sure that we don't end off too early in a paragraph. Once you start laning a paragraph, you have to read 3 psukim. And also you're not allowed to end a paragraph with less than 3 psukim. So you'll see how this becomes a little bit complicated. So Tzavis b'nei Yisrael v'yamar talehim es korbani lachmi dahavyan tamanya psuke. So let's start with the first paragraph. It's 8 psukim long. What are we supposed to do? Nikri trei tlasa psukim pashluhu trei ve'in mashayrin beparsha pachos mishlosha psukim. Now, if we give the Kohen 3 psukim and we give the Levi 3 psukim, we're left with 2 psukim. That's a no-no. Why is that? Because if a guy were to leave at this point, he would think that the next aliyah only has 2 psukim left. And that's a misconception that we're not allowed to create. We're not allowed to create the misconception that for the people who leave at that point, that the next guy is only going to have a 2 pasuk aliyah. So therefore, you're never allowed to leave less than 3 psukim at the end of a paragraph. Nikri arba'a. So the solution would then be obviously give the Kohen 4 psukim and give the Levi 4 psukim. And then the next 2 aliyahs will be from the following 2 paragraphs. But wait a minute. Pashuluhu shiva. But then we only have 7 psukim left. So you say 7 psukim, that's plenty, not so fast. Uviyom haShabbos havyin trei, uVarosh chodshechem havyin chamisha. Heichi navid. So we've got 2 psukim from the second paragraph of Uviyom haShabbos. We've got 5 psukim from the third paragraph of uVarosh chodshechem. So what are we supposed to do? Nikri trei mehav echad mehanach. So let the third aliyah read the 2 psukim of the second paragraph and the 1 more pasuk from the third paragraph. Ein maschilin beparsha pachos mishalosha psukim. That's no good, because once you start a paragraph, you have to read at least 3 psukim from the new paragraph. So the third aliyah is going to have to get, then he'll have to get 2 plus 3. He'll have to get a minimum of 5 psukim. So, and all you have left is 2 psukim. So likri trei mehat lasa mehach pashaluhu trei, and you're only leaving over 2 for the next guy if you do that. So Omar Lo, he says, Omar Lo, so Rabbi said back to him, he says, Zulo shamati, but kayotzi ba shamati. He says, I never heard what the proper protocol on Rosh Chodesh laning is, but I can tell you a similar halacha which has to do with the Kriyas HaTorah of the Anshe Ma'amad. Now we just learned Maseches Tainus, so this shouldn't be too foreign to you. What was the Anshe Ma'amad? There would be a contingency of Jews that would gather in the city. If it was your shift, of your sector, then you would gather for a full week into the Beis HaKnesses, do special prayers on behalf of all of Klal Yisrael, and you would have a special Kriyas HaTorah every single day of the week. And on the first day, what would you read? The first 2 paragraphs of the Sefer Torah, Bereshis and Vayomer Elokim Yehi Rakia. Now, Ditnan Vayomer Rishon Bereshis V'Yehi Rakia, V'tanu Yala Bereshis B'Shnai Yehi Rakia Be'echad. Bereshis is the larger paragraph, it's 5 psukim. Yehi Rakia is the smaller paragraph, it's 3 psukim. You have to have 3 aliyahs and you only have 8 psukim. So the Mishnah had said that the Bereshis will be split up into 2 aliyahs, and Yehi Rakia will get the 1 aliyah. So v'havinan ba bishlam Yehi Rakia be'echad detlasa psuki havu. Ela bereshis b'shnayim chamisha psukim havu. V'tanya kari betra lo yivchos mishlosha psukim. But I don't understand how you supposed to give 2 aliyahs to 5 psukim. If each person has to get a minimum of 3 psukim, how can you divide 5 into 2 people that each one is going to get 3? How's that going to work? So the itmar Allah. So the answer that was offered is a machlokus. Rav Omar Doileg Ushmul Omar Paisik. Rav says simple. The first guy getting the aliyah will read psukim Aleph, Beis, and Gimel, and the second guy will read Gimel, Dalet, and Hey. You basically repeat the third pasuk. You give it to the first guy and you give it to the second guy. So each one will end up having read 3 psukim because you're going to repeat pasuk gimel. Okay, that's Rab's solution. Does that sound familiar to you, by the way? That's what we do on Rosh Chodesh.
But why doesn't the Gemara...
One second. Let me finish the discussion. Ushmuel Amar Posek. Shmuel says, no, the first guy reads Aleph, Beis, and half of Pasuk Gimel, and the second guy reads the second half of Pasuk Gimel, Pasuk Dalet, and Pasuk Hey. You split the Pasuk in half. That's what you're supposed to do. One second. Okay, so the Gemara says, Rav Amar Dolek, my time alo Amar Posek. Why doesn't Rav hold that, like Shmuel, split the third pasuk in half? The Gemara answers, Ksavar kol psuka de lo paske Moshe anan lo paskinan lei. Because he says, if Moshe Rabbeinu did not cut the pasuk in half, you don't have a right to do that. Ushmuel Amar paskinan lei. So Shmuel says, I hold that you do have a right to do that. So frek the Gemara v'ha Amar Rabbi Chananya Kara. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute. We know that there was a Malamed Tinokos, a Rebbe in Cheder, who spoke to Rabbi Chanina, his Rebbe. His name also was Rabbi Chanina. He was Rabbi Chanina, the Chumash teacher. And he said, I had a lot of grief from my Rebbe, Rabbi Chanina, when I asked him if I could split up Sukkim so that the kids could learn it in smaller portions, right? And he gave me a lot of grief, and he said, fine, I'll give you a heter. But it was only with great difficulty that he gave me a heter, only to divide up a pasuk for the sake of the children. So you see that you can only do that when you're for educational purposes. You can't do that for Kriyas HaTorah. So the Gemara says, Hasam taimamai mishum de lo efsher, hachanami lo efsher. The Gemara says, you have a heter to split a pasuk if there's no other option. Here too, there's no other option, says Shmuel, and therefore you can split the pasuk in half. Ushmuel Amar Poisek, my time alo Amar Doilek. So why doesn't Shmuel hold of Rab's solution? Why can't you read Aleph Beis Gimel for the first guy and Gimel Dalet Hey for the second guy? The Gemara answers because Shmuel is concerned about the latecomers and the early leavers. Because if a guy comes in late after the first guy got Aleph Beis and Gimel, he's going to see that they're calling up. And then they call up the second guy, and he starts with Pasuk Gimel Dalet Hey. He's going to say, hey, the last guy only got an Aliyah of 2 psukim. And if a guy leaves after the first guy read Aleph, Beis, and Gimel, and he says there's only 2 psukim left in the paragraph, he's going to think that the next guy is going to get only a 2 Pasuk Aliyah. Go ahead, Alan.
Oh, it's done.
Okay. I figured we will. Okay. All right.
Why can't we repeat for the fourth Aliyah? Why can't we repeat the third Aliyah? In other words, the first 2 you split up normally, and then the last one you do complete, and for the fourth one you do the same as the third one.
1 second. Rav gives an elegant solution of repeating one pasuk. You're advocating to repeat an entire paragraph. Why is that better? There's a desirability not to unnecessarily repeat psukim. As you see, the Gemara only Bekoshi gives us that heter of repeating a pasuk if there's no other option.
But then you wouldn't have this misunderstanding for the latecomers.
Oh, that's... No, you would. If a guy were to leave at that point and he sees that the Kriyas HaTorah is over, he'll think there's only 3 aliyahs and not 4.
Okay. It's another problem.
Yeah. Anyway. All right. So Meisveis. Let's now ask a challenge. The Gemara says, Parsha shel shisha psukim koronos abishnaim v'shechal misha psukim biyachid. So the Brisa says emphatically that if you have a paragraph of 6 psukim, you can divide it into 2 aliyahs. But if the paragraph only has 5 psukim, only one person can get the aliyah for that whole paragraph. And therefore, Korah Rishon Shlosha, Hasheni Korah Shnai mi Parsha Zu Vechad mi Parsha Acheres. What happens if B'di'evid, the first guy getting the aliyah, only reads 3 psukim out of a 5 pasuk paragraph, and then he steps away? What are you supposed to do? So you call up the Levi, and you have him read the remaining 2 psukim and 1 pasuk of the new paragraph. Apparently, this opinion is not concerned with starting with a new paragraph and reading less than 3 psukim. That's okay, says. As long as the Levi will get his 3 psukim, even if he only reads 1 pasuk of the new paragraph, it's okay. The Yesh Omrim, but the other opinion says no. Shlosha, lefi she'ein maschilin b'parsha pachos mishlosha psukim. The second opinion is no. that once he starts reading a new paragraph, he's got to read 3 into the new paragraph because of that concern, right? Because if a guy comes in at that point, after the guy finishes reading just one pasuk of the new paragraph, he's going to think that the previous guy that finished his aliyah only had a one pasuk aliyah. So now the Gemara says, okay, that's the brisa. My question to you is, V'im isa l'mandomer doleg nidlog l'mandomer posek nifsog. Why does the brisa emphatically say that if you have a 5 pasuk paragraph, you cannot divide it into 2 aliyahs? We just gave you a way to do it. According to Rav, you can repeat pasuk gimel, and according to Shmuel, cut pasuk gimel in half and give it half to the first guy and half to the second guy. So the Gemara says, Shiny Hasam de Efshir Bahachi. The Gemara says, no, we only offer the solution of being doleg or posek, like Rav and Shmuel were talking about, when there's no other option. But when you have a Kriyas HaTorah, when you have plenty of psukim that you have the option of laning, why put yourself in that position? So therefore, the Mishnah is saying that in a situation where you could continue reading, then don't break up a 5 pasuk paragraph into 2 aliyahs. You don't have a right to do that. It's only when you have limited text, because you're finished with it. There's a full subject material, and if you were to read further, it would have nothing to do with the Inyana Diyoma, with having to do with Rosh Chodesh. That's when we tell you that you have no other option, so you either have to be dolig or posek, like Rav and Shmuel.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
Home on Sukkot, we do exactly what Mendel said.
Israel.
What?
Israel.
You read by Yom Hashlishi, Yom Ravi, Yom Chamishi, and then you repeat the whole thing.
That's right, you do. Again, you'd have to say, because there's no other option. The Chazal were not prepared to allow you, because there's no point in reading a portion of a paragraph, because each paragraph is 3 psukim. So, or 4 psukim, whatever it is. 3 psukim. So there you have no other option. You're limited as far as how much you can read going beyond the text.
In Israel, they repeat the day 4 times.
Yeah, right. Amar Rabbi Tanchum, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, halacha ki yesh omrim. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says that we paskin like the yesh omrim, which means that if a guy stopped after 3 psukim into a 5 pasuk paragraph, the second guy can't just read 2 psukim from this paragraph and 1 pasuk of the new paragraph. He's got to read 2 psukim of the old paragraph and 3 psukim of the new paragraph. Amar Rabbi Tanchum, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Kishem she'ein maschilin beparsha pachos migimel psukim, kachein meshayrin beparsha pachos mishlosh psukim. He says something that seems to be superfluous. He says that just like you can't start a new paragraph and read less than 3 psukim, so too you can't stop reading from a paragraph and leave over less than 3 psukim left at the end. So pshita hashta uma aschalta de kamekel tanakama machmiri yesh omrim shiur de machmir tanakama lo kol shekain de machmiri yesh omrim. So the Gemara says, I don't understand why he needed to make the second statement at all. If you're paskening like the yesh omrim, who say that once you're starting a new paragraph, you have to read at least 3 psukim, and that's not a concern that the Tanakama had. The Tanakama said, no, it's okay. You could read the first 1 pasuk of a new paragraph and stop there, as long as you fulfilled your obligation of 3 psukim. So you see, the Tanakama isn't concerned about starting a new paragraph, but he clearly says that you're not allowed to leave over less than 3 psukim at the end of a paragraph. So if the Tanakama is machmir to not leave over at the end, even though he's makel that you've no problem of starting with less than 3 psukim, then surely the yesh omrim, who are machmir not to allow you to start a paragraph with less than 3 psukim, surely they'll be machmir to not allow you to leave over less than 3 psukim at the end of a paragraph. So the Gemara says, no, I'll tell you why you need to say it, because there could be a counter-argument. Mahu detema nichnasin shchichi yotzin lo shchichi demanchi sefer Torah v'nafki kamash malon. Because you might have made a counter-argument as follows. You know why the Yesh Omrim say that it's imperative to read at least 3 psukim at the beginning of a paragraph? It's because of the nichnasim, it's because of the latecomers. It is much more common for a guy to come late to shul than for a person to leave in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah. A guy comes late to shul, he sees that you're starting from pasuk beis of that paragraph, he's going to think that the last guy only got an aliyah of 1 pasuk. That's a much more likely misconception. But to be concerned about people leaving in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah, to forsake the Torah in order to go do their own stuff, that is a bizayon of the Sefer Torah. Who would do that? Who would walk out in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah? So therefore, to be concerned, maybe you're not concerned because it's much less likely for people to walk out. So you might have argued that if the whole reason we're not going to allow you to stop with less than 3 psukim at the end of the paragraph is because if a guy leaves at that point, he's going to think the next guy's going to get an aliyah of 2 psukim. We don't have to worry about that. Who's going to leave in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah? Right? So Kamash Malan, no. You do have to worry about both the Nichnasim, the latecomers, and the Yotzim and the early leavers. The Tanakam, yeah.
He's going to be rushing to put on his talis to film. He's not going to really pay attention. He may not notice that.
Shabbos afternoon.
What do you mean? He put on his talis before he came into shul.
Shabbos afternoon.
You're supposed to put on your talis before you come into the Beis HaKnesses. Didn't you know that's a famous Kitzur Shulchan Aruch? Okay. The Tanakama Maishna Shiurei Delo Mishum Yotzin Aschulei Nami Gezerah Mishum Hanichnasim. So the Gemara now says, let's try and understand the Tanakama. Why is it that he says you're not allowed to leave over at the end of a paragraph less than 3 psukim? Why? Because someone's going to leave at that point and think that the next guy's only going to get a 2 pasuk aliyah. So why isn't he worried about aschuli nami? Why isn't he worried about? Why does he allow you to start reading a pasuk in the new paragraph and he lets you read less than 3 psukim of the new paragraph? Why shouldn't he be worried that if a guy were to leave at that, if a guy were to come in at that point, he would think that the previous aliyah was less than 3 psukim? So Amri Manda Ayil Shiyule Shayil. The answer is very simple. According to the Tanakama, a guy walks into shul and he sees that they're starting from pasuk Beis or from pasuk Gimel. He'll shmooze. He'll ask his friend, "Hey, what happened to the last aliyah?" And they'll tell him, "Oh, no. The last aliyah had 12 psukim for his aliyah. They happened to read into the new paragraph 2 psukim. That now that you've left, the next coming guy is going to get a pasuk of more than 3 psukim." Okay, so that's why
talking to him, davening.
It must be they haven't started reading the Torah yet.